We're live in Salford for a TV first. It's Boris Johnson versus Jeremy Corbyn. The ITV debate. Good evening. In just over 3 weeks, we'll be voting in what many think is the most important general election of our lifetimes. Tonight, the Conservative Prime Minister Boris Johnson and the leader of the Labour Party, Jeremy Corbyn, debate face-to-face, responding to questions from ITV viewers. Mr. Corbyn, it's over to you.
Thank you, Julie. The Conservative government is failing. It's failed on the economy, on the climate crisis, the National Health Service, and on Brexit. We will get Brexit sorted by giving you, the people, the final say and implement whatever you decide.
First question tonight comes from Kath Sherlock from Bradford. Kath.
Both of you have promised that Brexit will be resolved in the next few months. But you're really telling us the truth. There have been so many broken promises. Can you reassure me that we will not be talking about this forever?
Thank you very much indeed, Kath.
Priority is obviously to get it sorted. We will, within 3 months, negotiate a credible leave option with the European Union, and within 6 months, put that to a referendum of the British people to decide between that option of leaving whilst protecting jobs and trade and the Good Friday Agreement with Europe, or remaining as full members of the European Union. That will be the choice put before the British people. The idea that the Prime Minister Boris Johnson's deal can be dealt with and finished by the end of January is such nonsense. What he's proposing is a trade deal with the United States that would take at least 7 years to negotiate, whilst at the same time saying he would negotiate a special trade deal with the European Union. The two things are actually incompatible. Prime Minister Boris Johnson voted twice against Theresa May's deal, one time for it, then proposed his own deal, which narrowly got through the House of Commons with the support of the DUP, which is actually even worse than Theresa May's deal. He cannot protect jobs in this country on that basis. And I think it is time that we actually recognise we have to maintain a firm and good trading relationship with Europe. Otherwise, more jobs will be lost all over the country, as they've already been lost because of the uncertainty. When you say you'll get it done, really, Mr. Johnson, you are going to embark on probably 7 years of negotiations with the United States on a trade deal. You've already indicated that you will allow our National Health Service to be put at risk by a trade deal with the United States. You've already indicated that you would do a Canada-style agreement, which took at least 7 years to negotiate. So you're not going to get it done in a few months, and you know that perfectly well.
Let's have a look at the timetable. You reckon that you can get your divorce deal done and a trade deal done by December 2020. Do you stick on a pledge on that deadline of December 2020? Have you dug yourself a new ditch?
Absolutely, because people don't forget, people said that we couldn't do a new deal in 3 months. People said that they would never open up the treaty. They said it was impossible to do. Actually, we succeeded. We have ample time to do a fantastic free trade deal with our friends and partners in the EU, because we're already in a state of perfect alignment, both for tariffs and for quotas.
3 months to negotiate, 6 months for a referendum, and that will bring that process to an end. What we know of the government's proposals, what we know of what Mr. Johnson has done, is a series of secret meetings with the United States in which they were proposing to open up our NHS markets, as they call them, to American companies. Freedom of Information Act request was made in order to find out what happened at these meetings. That's what happened at these meetings. Every single line of this document redacted out. A document here of US-UK negotiations, summary of specific negotiating objectives, full market access for US products to our National Health Service. You're going to sell our National Health Service out to the United States and Big Pharma.
Our next questioner, staying with the issue of Brexit, John Firth wants to ask about the possible threat to the Union, which could mean the breakup of the United Kingdom. John.
Is the Union worth sacrificing for Brexit?
Well, I hope the Union is not going to be broken up or sacrificed in this way. But the agreements that the Prime Minister negotiated, or he's put towards to Parliament, was about creating a border between the Republic of Ireland and Northern Ireland, creating a different customs arrangement for Northern Ireland with the rest of Ireland, having promised to the Democratic Unionist Party he would never do that. Clearly, there is an issue there. Clearly, there are issues all around about this deal that he's proposed. And I do think that this deal is damaging to this country, damaging to the rights we have at work and consumer protection and environmental protection in this country, and very damaging to manufacturing industry jobs all over Britain, some of which have already gone because of uncertainty over Brexit.
Thank you very much indeed.
I think I ought to be able to reply to this nonsense.
Will you be able to rely on that? I'd just like to have
the idea there's going to be a coalition between Labour and the SNP. There's not going to be a coalition between Labour and anybody else. There are no deals that have been done, and there will be no deals that are done.
OK.
Nicola Sturgeon has made it absolutely clear that the price of her support will be a referendum on Scotland in 2020.
If you do have to get to a point where you have to make a deal with the SNP, Nicola Sturgeon has already said, don't pick up the phone unless you can guarantee a second independence referendum. Can you rule it out before the end of the first year?
I've said that there would be no deal with the SNP. There would be no support for a Scottish referendum in the early years of the next Labour government.
Can I turn, please, to the issue of Northern Ireland? In your hustings for your leadership race, Mr Johnson, you said, under no circumstances, whatever happens, will I allow the EU or anyone else to create any division down the Irish Sea. You spoke at another conference a year ago saying that that would damage the fabric of the Union. And now, here we have your deal that you've presented to Parliament.
The problem with what Mr Johnson just said is that he said exactly the opposite when he spoke to a DUP conference. You said there would be no border down the Irish Sea.
This whole nation will have watched you both throughout this campaign in utter despair. At the heart of all of this is one very simple question. How can we trust you? Under your leadership, the debate has become toxic and degraded with an appalling level of lies and childish abuse. How can this nation trust you to have the personal integrity and individual strength of character to look after our country's interest, rescue us from this mess, and bring us back together?
Thank you very much indeed.
Trust is something that has to be earned, and as a public representative, you have to listen to the people that elected you in the first place, and you have to listen to people all over the country in all walks of life. I spend a great deal of time travelling around the country, listening to people, be they chief executives, workers, people sweeping the street, or the homeless. Everybody you meet knows something you don't know. Leadership is about listening to people, trying to put their ideas into practice, and finally come to a decision in which you can take a country and our society forward. My style of leadership is actually to listen to people and try and bring consensus together in my own party and obviously within Parliament. Because the issues we face of division in our society do have to be conquered. They're not going to be conquered by diktat, but only by listening and taking us forward that way.
To keep you both the time. Thank you very much. Farhad put his finger right on something very specific in this question. How can the nation trust you to have the personal integrity and the individual strength of character? Mr Corbyn, how would you respond to that particular point?
I think we have to represent people, take decisions and be honest with people about why you're taking the decisions that you are and how to bring people together. My whole strategy on Brexit has been to recognise whether you voted Remain and live in a private rented accommodation and in Port and in London, voted Leave and you live in the North and are in the same situation, your issues are the same. The problems of poverty, inequality and division within our society. Bring people together, don't divide them.
I would just... It's about personal integrity and individual character. Does the truth matter in this election?
I think it does. And I think it's very important. I think it's very important to hear...
We've been very clear on our policies in relation to Europe. I think we're also very clear on all the other policies that will be unveiled in our manifesto on Thursday, and they will be accompanied by a fully costed grey book with it. So every pledge we make will be fully funded, because I believe the British people deserve that knowledge, deserve to know what we're going to do, and deserve a government that is actually not going to preside over rising homelessness, increasing inequality and chaos in the NHS.
Okay.
Instead, are going to invest in the future of this country.
Gentlemen, will you take some personal responsibility for the way the debate has unfolded in politics in this country? We know, of course, Mr Johnson, that people point to the fact that you promised 40 times on record we'd be out of the EU on October the 31st. One of your former chief of staffs from your time as London Mayor said that you'd betrayed every person you'd ever had any dealings with.
Anti-Semitism is an absolute evil and scourge within our society. Racism in any form is a scourge in our society. I have taken action in my party where anyone has committed any anti-Semitic acts or made any anti-Semitic statements. They are either suspended or expelled from the party, and we've investigated every single case. We do take this very, very seriously indeed, because I do not want to live in a society where racism is rife. I understand and recognise the history, the desperate history of the Jewish people in the 20th century, which came about from an unrestriction of anti-Semitism in the 1920s. We've got to stand up against racism in any form in our society.
Thank you. And on the question, Omar Shahab, and it's on the NHS. Omar.
I'm a hospital doctor, and I see firsthand the unsustainable pressure on the NHS. Elderly patients stuck on trolleys in corridors, unacceptably long waiting times for operations. Aside from pledging more money for the health service, how will you ensure that the health service can meet future demands? And would that involve any privatisation?
Dr Shahab, thank you very much indeed for first response. Mr Corbyn.
I think the NHS is a wonderful and brilliant institution, but it is suffering under the most incredible pressure. The staff are unbelievably stressed by the job they have to do and the insufficiency of facilities to deal with it. There are 33,000 nurse vacancies at the moment in the NHS. I'll give you a story. Yesterday, a woman, a friend of mine, died at 6:30 yesterday morning from secondary breast cancer. The day before, she'd gone to hospital at the recommendation of her GP in order to get urgent treatment. She waited 8 hours. The nurses that were trying to help her were unable to get anyone to see her because they were under such strain and stress. And so she recorded a video saying, please, in my memory, make sure nobody else goes through this pain. We've got to fund our NHS properly and fill the vacancies and make sure it's there for all time. It's one of the most civilised things about this country.
Thank you, Mr Corbyn.
The problem is that the A&E performance is now at its worst ever. There are 4 million people waiting for operations. There are all the vacancies that have not been filled within the NHS. The Health and Social Care Act allows the privatisation of services. And indeed, we have the nonsense of our National Health Service being taken to court by private operators because they didn't get contracts from it. Let's end the privatisation within the NHS and instead have a fully funded NHS for all people.
Corbyn, respond to this, and this is the proposal for a 4-day week for workers across the economy within 10 years of the Labour government.
It is about reducing the working week all across the economy, paid for by productivity increases all across. Britain works longer than most. But, well, people need to be aware that actually a shorter working week is probably a good thing for their health and well-being, as is decent pay. What I would also say to Mr Johnson is that his proposal for 40 new hospitals, which he grandly announced in July, turns out to be 6 reconfigurations without any clarity as to where they're actually going to be.
On the issue of privatisation and private provision with the NHS, sometimes it is there provided by organisations that are not for profit. It has extended capacity within the NHS. Will you rule out any privatisation in the NHS, any private provision within the NHS under...
The principle is to ensure that all people that work in the NHS are employed by the NHS on similar contracts across the NHS. The internal market must go within the NHS, and what is happening is privatisation of services across the NHS, and I think that is very, very damaging damaging to the whole principles of the NHS. We also have problems of social care, which are not being addressed either, and there are about 1 million people waiting for social care at the present time.
That both have made significant spending pledges over the past couple of weeks, and not just on the NHS. And Beverly Davis from Newport has a question related to this. Beverly.
I'm a care home laundry assistant earning minimum wage. I've worked all my life and have seen the real impact of austerity, which neither of you have. Now, you say there's plenty to spend. I'm concerned because neither of you have ever had to worry about money. You throw it away on silly election giveaways. What can you say to reassure me?
Thank you very much indeed. Mr. Corbyn.
Well, we've had austerity for 9 years in this country. We've had a growth of billionaires in this country. We've had a growth of extreme poverty in this country. We've had a growth of personal debt from people trying to look after children, look after older people. I think the first thing has to be an increase in wages by having a £10 an hour living wage for all people, an end to zero hours contracts, and an investment strategy across the country that does give us an increase in manufacturing jobs all across Britain, which we're not having at the present time. I think this election is a turning point in the way in which we're going to manage our economy in the future.
Thank you, Mr. Corbyn. Can we have a pledge here from both of you? Simply, is austerity over in the United Kingdom, Mr. Corbyn?
We will end austerity. I'm absolutely clear about that. Yes, because it's been so brutal on the lives of so many people. Parliament increased corporation tax to around the levels it was in 2010 in order to reinvest properly in education, in order to pay for the ending of university tuition fees, to give every student a decent chance of going to university and life. And we will start to redress the grotesque levels of imbalance in our society. We're a society of billionaires and the very poor, neither of which are right. The reality of austerity has been to hit the funds of local authorities, has meant the life chances of children have been damaged by underfunding schools, head teachers going out collecting money in order to keep a school going, young people with no after-school clubs, no youth centre to go to, and the levels of dislocation and poverty in so many areas of Britain, deliberately, because of austerity, must and will change. Yes, we will invest in education, we will invest in housing, we will invest in health.
Of course, all of this, gentlemen, is, of course, predicated on what sort of Brexit deal either of you might be able to achieve. Sue from Leeds, is the monarchy fit for purpose? Jeremy Corbyn.
Needs a bit of improvement.
Mr. Johnson. Now ask Jeremy Corbyn and Boris Johnson for a very short concluding statement. Mr. Corbyn first.
You've seen tonight the real choice you'll have in this election, and your voice must be heard. This is a once-in-a-generation election to end privatisation and give the National Health Service the funding it needs, to give people the final say and get Brexit sorted, to tackle the climate emergency that threatens our futures, to invest in good jobs in every region and nation of our country. I ask that you vote for hope and vote for Labour on the 12th of December.